Get back! Traitor! You scumbag!
Paedophile protectors!
You paedophile!
Oh, go.
Keir Starmer just faced the most humiliating moment of his political career. The Labour leader, once seen as the party's great hope, walked into his latest speech expecting cheers. What he got instead was boos, anger and outright rejection.
Job and ask the real questions. Well, I am telling you now, and I hope this goes out, you have failed this country. You have.
They've been on the front line keeping people alive. So I really don't need lectures from you about this pandemic.
You've got one. Why? Can we come in? Okay.
What are you doing?
Good. Here's the landlord. That man is not allowed in my pub. It's the landlord. I'm not going to physically hurt him. That man. That's assault. I am not bothering you. I am not bothering him. That man is not allowed in my pub.
But the trouble for Starmer began from the time he set foot in Southport. The crowd, angered by the recent senseless killing of 3 young girls, were angry at the Labour leader, and they showed it from the beginning.
True democracy is citizen-led. Politics needs an update.
What's your name?
What's your name?
Who are you, sir?
Stand back a bit.
Demand democracy.
What's your name?
Stand back.
Stand back a bit.
This wasn't just a minor setback, it was a full-blown disaster. People weren't just disagreeing with him, they were furious, shouting him down and exposing the deep cracks in his leadership. So what exactly did Starmer say that sparked this outrage? And what does this mean for his future and the future of Labour?
Contribution they make. My sister was a... I think this guy's obviously got a pass from the 2019 conference. We changed the party. While he's been protesting, we've been changing the party. That's why we've got a Labour government.
It all started with what should have been a routine event, a Labour speech meant to rally supporters and prove that Starmer was still the man to lead them into the next election. But from the moment he stepped onto that stage, something felt off. The energy in the room wasn't excitement, but frustration. People fidgeted in their seats, crossing their arms, exchanging sceptical glances, and when Starmer began speaking, it became clear why.
Let them tell working people which public services they would cut. If they think tax rises are unfair, let them tell working people which taxes they'd raise instead. If they don't see our long-term investment in infrastructure as necessary, let them explain to working people how they would grow the economy for them. And if they think that taxes are too high, but they don't want to cut public spending, let them tell working people why the lessons of Liz Truss no longer apply. Because I've said it before, and I'll say it again, the time is long overdue for politicians in this country to level with you honestly about the trade-offs this country faces. to stop insulting your intelligence.
His speech was filled with vague promises, the same old talking points, and the kind of politicised speech that makes people tune out.
But look, here's the good news. They don't get to choose. You don't have to take it anymore. You can stop them. And that's the beauty of democracy. The power of the vote rests in your hands. And on the 2nd of May, you can reject the chaos, you can reject division, you can reject decline and vote for national renewal with Labour.
But the audience wasn't just tuning out, they were getting angry. And then the first heckle happened. A voice from the back of the crowd cut through the air, "You have failed us."
There, a note there, you said, you know it's unpopular. Are you willing to be unpopular?
We're going to have to be unpopular. Tough decisions are tough decisions. Popular decisions aren't tough, they're easy. When we talk about tough decisions, I'm talking about tough decisions. The things that last government ran away from, that governments traditionally run away from, I'm convinced that because they've run away from difficult decisions, we haven't got the change we need for the country. And because I'm so determined to bring about that change, I'll do the tough things and I'll do them early to make sure that we can bring about the change that we need. So I'm not going to apologise for this, but I do recognise how difficult it is for some people. I do recognise for pensioners, it's really hard for some pensioners here. But of course, they do rely on the NHS. They do rely on public transport. So these things aren't completely divorced.
Starmer paused, clearly thrown off. But before he could regain control, another voice joined in. Shame on you. The floodgates had opened. Boo after boo rained down on the Labour leader as the audience made it clear they weren't buying what he was selling. This wasn't the usual pushback politicians get from the opposition. This was coming from one of Labour's biggest bases, filled with people who had voted Labour their whole lives. People who had once believed in him and now they were turning their backs on him in real time. But why? What had Starmer done to lose them so completely? The answer lies in 3 key betrayal issues, where he not only failed to lead, but actively alienated the very people who once backed him. First, there was his failure to be a strong opposition leader. Starmer had promised to hold the government accountable, to challenge bad decisions, to fight for the people. But when it mattered most during lockdowns, during economic struggles and scandal after scandal, he stayed silent.
In Southport is a devastating moment in our history. No words come anywhere close to expressing the brutality and horror in this case. Every parent in Britain will have had the same thought. It could have been anywhere. It could have been our children. But it was Southport. It was Bibi, 6 years old. Elsie, 7. Alice, 9. Back in August, I said there would be a time for questions, but that first justice had to be done, and that above all, we must not interfere with the work of the police, the prosecutors, and the delivery of that justice.
He played it safe, and now people were calling him out for it. One furious voter stood up and shouted, "You failed to ask the real questions. Thousands of people suffered because you didn't do your job." Second, there was his handling of the latest national tragedy, the brutal murder of 3 innocent young girls. Starmer spoke about it in broad scripted terms, trying to sound like a leader, but the public wasn't having it. They wanted answers, they wanted accountability, and instead they got more political nonsense.
If it was going to prejudice the case around July to release that information about the terrorist trading manual and the ricin, then why didn't it or wouldn't it have prejudiced the case in October? And there is an answer for that, isn't
Well, he uses political lingo to get round it, just deflects the question slightly. It's typical 2-tier Keir talk, isn't it? Say, that didn't happen then, and it didn't happen now. You're all being gaslit, which is basically what I think. He's gaslighting the public to believe one thing when he does it in his own political, prejudiced way against The other, when there's something else that may hurt
apparently
him.
it wasn't terrorism in July, but
Well, exactly.
it was confirmed to be terrorism in October.
But the reality is it's misinformation, isn't it? It's for the police to put out, good choir boy, nothing to do with terrorism. That is government peddling misinformation, in my opinion.
Actually, the police are still not treating it as a terrorist incident.
They're not
still
treating it, you're right.
I think, no, I'm sorry. The police are not treating it as a terrorist incident. Now, you could argue with that, but actually what Keir Starmer said was correct.
The fact that the attacker had clear ties to extremism, that he had been reported multiple times to the authorities, and that Starmer knew about him and still failed to act on it, was a moment where leadership mattered and Starmer danced around the truth, refusing to say what needed to be said. That was the final straw for many in the crowd.
How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something? Time to change, Starmer. Come on, needed. How many more children? Is it mine next? We're going to stand up for our children. React. Bye-bye.
Starmer had no answers, just empty words. Finally, there was Brexit. Starmer had spent years pushing for a second referendum, fighting against Brexit with everything he had, but now he was trying to rewrite history. He is pretending he'd never really been against it, telling his supporters to simply move on. But the problem is, they don't want to move on. They remembered and they felt betrayed.
The vile individual who carried it out. But that is no comfort. And more importantly, it is no excuse. And so, as part of the inquiry launched by the Home Secretary yesterday, I will not let any institution of the state deflect from their failure. Failure which, in this case, frankly, leaps off the page.
The crowd wasn't just frustrated with Starmer's words, they were disgusted by his actions, and no amount of carefully prepared speeches could change their minds. Then, the most humiliating moment of all came. A voter and a lifelong Labour supporter walked up to the microphone. He looked Starmer dead in the eye and said, "I voted Labour my entire life, and you have failed this country." The room fell silent. Starmer had no comeback, no defence, just the realisation that he had lost the very people he was supposed to lead. But this wasn't just one bad night, but a sign of something much bigger.
The question is, did they do it because of political correctness, because they were worried about the fact that he was from an ethnic minority, or did they do it to cover up the utter failures of Prevent, of the police, of the courts, of the school, of the care workers? I mean, this guy was known to be just drifting around from time to time with violent intent, with knives. And they will have known that. And the whole thing is so inexplicable to all of us.
Richard Tice, Reform UK's deputy leader, joins me now from Westminster. Richard, did Keir Starmer preside over one of the biggest cover-ups in British history?
Well, Dan, it looks that way. I mean, we don't know really anymore. We know that the Prime Minister's announced a public inquiry. Funny, isn't it, that when the Labour Party's not being challenged, he's quite happy to announce a public inquiry, but not when Labour councillors are involved in covering up a child rape gang scandal. But there we are. Look, I think the position of the Prime Minister is completely outrageous on this. And the British people want answers, frankly.
A leadership crisis, a party on the verge of collapse, and an opposition leader who may not survive the political storm that's coming next. And believe me, this is just the beginning. The fallout of that speech wasn't just a bad night. It was a warning sign. A sign that Keir Starmer was losing control of the very movement he was supposed to be leading.
And this is not really about racial tension, Rakib, it seems to me. This is about a community in the north of England who have been the unfortunate recipients of the latest outrage, the latest violent outburst against innocent people, in this case, little children. Nobody can quite believe that anyone would want to stab these little children. We've got pictures of them on the front pages of all the papers this morning. I mean, people are right to be angry, aren't they?
Oh, firstly, morning, Mike, and what a truly horrific incident. And I think the release of the pictures of the 3 young little girls, it really strikes home how brutal this incident was. And for me, you're quite right. It's not so much a race relations incident. I think ultimately what we're talking about is an unspeakable act of violence. But I think the one thing that I'll say is that the authorities have been somewhat slow in terms of releasing crucial bits of information, especially when it comes to the background of the suspect. And I think the worry for me, Mike, is that has very much left a vacuum which has been filled by all kinds of conspiracy theories, baseless theories in terms of who the suspect is. And Mike, I'm sure that you saw that there was even suggestions that this was a Muslim asylum seeker who had arrived in the UK via a small...
But it doesn't end there. Behind the scenes, Labour insiders are panicking. MPs are whispering about his failures, and party members who once backed him are starting to question if he's the right man to take them into the next election. This wasn't just one group of angry supporters, this was a growing rebellion inside Labour itself. But it gets crazier. Starmer's problem isn't just that people are booing him, it's that he has no real support left. His entire strategy was built on the idea that he was a safe pair of hands, someone who could restore Labour's credibility after the Corbyn years. But what happens when people start realising that safe actually means weak? That Starmer's version of leadership is just avoiding controversy, dodging difficult questions, and trying to please everyone while standing for nothing? That's exactly what's happening now, and the cracks are showing everywhere. Labour councils across the country are in open revolt, and local activists, the backbone of the party, are furious at Starmer's failures on key issues like housing crime and the economy. In Parliament, his own MPs are starting to lose faith. Some are even calling for a change in leadership before the general election. The truth is that these MPs know deep down, they know the truth. If Starmer can't even handle the Southport crisis, how is he supposed to handle the country? But the real nightmare for Starmer is yet to come. The next election is creeping closer, and if he doesn't turn things around fast, Labour could face a disaster of its own making, because right now Starmer isn't just losing control of the party, he's losing the trust of the people, and once that's gone, there's no coming back. The worst part of this disaster, Starmer had every opportunity to fix it, but instead he made it worse. The moment the boos started, he could have shown strength, he could have fought back, addressed the anger in the room and proven he's the leader Labour desperately needs. Instead, he stood there, stunned, like he didn't know what hit him. And that's the problem, Starmer doesn't know how to handle a crisis. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating political content.